when we talk about our document management software, FileHold, there's a very distinct difference between what we do and what Windows does, and it's a lot more than just what you can do with the software or doing things like a workflow. It comes to a much more basic level, and I thought it'd be worth taking a moment to explain what some of these differences are. So before we go too far down that road, it's worth talking about what a DMS is. I am not going to discuss what Windows is or what a Windows style of environment is. I'm not worried about that. I think everyone pretty much knows what those things are. A document management software, or DMS, is a software that provides a structured environment to store, organize, and control electronic files. So this is the key aspect here, is this word structure. You're going to keep hearing this over and over again today. Don't worry, I'm going to talk a bit more about what structure is later, but I want to introduce the idea right now that it's about an environment with structure being a fundamental part of it. Now, DMS is considered an enterprise-grade software. Enterprise-grade software is often more complex to deploy. It involves a lot more elements to it, and it can be an organizational changing software. It's less about it being a tool and more about being a different way of thinking and working about business. It's also true that some people say when it comes to enterprise-grade software, you should be looking at your own internal processes. And if 80% of your processes can work with an enterprise-grade software, that's perfect. And if 20% does not, it's worth considering changing those processes to match what the software does. So again, it's another example of why enterprise-grade is such a powerful software that can change how an organization works. Now, a common feature of DMS, FileHold included, but of DMS as a category of software, would be organization, classification, and tagging of digital documents and records, controlling access to digital content, so gatekeeping to some extent, letting who can come into the system, audit records of activity, so everything that's being done in the system is being tracked, monitored, and can be recalled for others, some level of version control so that you understand what current versus prior content is, a retention policy of some level to be able to enforce how long documents should be held for or when they should be disposed of. And it should extend paperless functionality. So workflow, search, any of those kind of aspects that are purely a digital solution only, as opposed to an analog for paper. So when we're actually moving things into a digital process, we want to look at that functionality to it. Now, how is a DMS different than Windows? So DMS is a structured environment. And when we say structure, it means that there is a relational database associated with the contents of the system. So we're trying to apply some level of logic or some level of connection between the documents. We're not just putting in whatever we want to for whatever reason that we want to. Now, structured versus unstructured environments are better understood with a bit of compare and contrast. So in a structured environment, the document content is typically highly organized and formatted in such a way as to be identical. Whereas in an unstructured environment, no pre-formatting is required. You can put whatever you want into it. With a structured environment, we have a relational database. So something that's showing how documents are tied together, and not just in a one-to-one environment, but in a one-to-many or a many-to-many environment when we're using that database. Whereas in an unstructured environment, separate entities of data. Each file is an island unto itself. It is not necessarily connected to another document in any way. With a structured environment, especially with a database, we're going to use schema to control the use type. So a schema being in FileHold means how we're planning on using the document, the organizing structure towards a document. However, schema also relates to databases, and it's a line of control towards a database. Whereas in an unstructured environment, you have no use type defined for those documents. A structured environment is going to allow some level of custom tagging of information to a document to show those relationships together, whereas in an unstructured environment, we typically see those tags limited to application properties. So you have a right-click on a document and look at the properties, you'll see information into there that it's not metadata, it's just property information that that file is using. And finally, a structured environment requires processing for new content. So we just can't add whatever we want to. We have to make sure there's some level of processing when it comes in to add structure to it or verify the structure that may exist. Whereas an unstructured environment, anything can be added instantly. And a DMS lets you apply structure to traditionally unstructured content, like a Word document. When we think about a Word document, there's nothing about that Word file that necessarily associates that with other content. They have no predefined relationships until you define them. So once we add it into a structured environment, we apply structure to it, we create those strong bonds of relationship between documents, we're creating a robust environment for ourselves. So why is structure important? This is one of the key aspects to this. And again, I'm not just thinking about FileHold with this conversation, I'm thinking about the DMS category of software and why structure can give you value. So structure allows an organization to apply essential elements to unstructured documents. So we can take something that doesn't have any relationship and apply it to there. Now, for instance, if you're looking at something such as an accounting software and you're dealing with an invoice for the accounting software, then that is fundamentally going to be a structured document within that accounting software because it's only dealing with that kind of document. It's only going to put that kind of structure to it. Because FileHold can have any kind of document added to it, you're going to build the structure out for it and then apply those elements as to what you define for structure to that document. Now, there's two levels to that. The first level that we're going to see is going to be that administrative level, who owns a document when it was added into the system, those system values of information about the document. That's part of the structure. The second half being your organizational defined structure or schema and metadata. So we want to keep that in mind, that we're doing more than just your tags of information. We're also keeping that administrative data attached to it. So some of the reasons why structure is important. First one is visibility and access control. So a DMS exerts rights for access for documents when users log in and further controls for what they're allowed to do to a document or record depending on their user role. Information categorization or schema. So DMS lets you define what a document means to the organization and how the organization intends to use it. Relational information, which is metadata. So I'm saying relational information because we're not just putting information onto one document so we can have, so that only that one document has it. We're adding that information to it so we can see how it works with other documents. Think of that invoice number. While that invoice number may only exist on a single document, it may be referenced in another document, and that creates that relational point of information between them. The classic example of that, in my opinion, is a purchase order number because it's used by many different document types for a common purpose. Standardized processes is our last reason for it here because a standardized process such as retention, workflow, formatting, filing rules, these are all things that structure can apply to documents automatically when they come in. No more guessing about what a retention policy or what the format for the document should be. Now, we've talked a lot about structured environments. It's often better to understand them when we look at what an unstructured environment is. And I'm going to give an example here. So with Windows or any other non-structured environment, you will only have two tools to define what a document is and how it will be used. We have our first level is a subfolder, and our second level is going to be the file name. Those are our two tools that we have to show a relationship between them. Now, it's worth saying, sorry, went too far ahead there, this is what I would call a fragile relationship. We take a look at the series of documents I have, a bunch of different PDFs. If I move one of those documents to a different folder, I've changed my relationship to that document. Right now, these are journal articles, and they're under a folder called peer reviewed. If I move one of them to the trade journal, I'm going to assume that the content of that is now a trade journal document. And it's easy for me to make that move because I can just casually move it from one place to another. We do this all the time with Windows. That is a fragile movement. We are breaking that relationship that I have with that document, that content, that meaning to it, and this is one of the risks of an unstructured environment. So when we talk about our unstructured environment, why would we want to use this? Well, first of all, it looks familiar. We're comfortable with what an unstructured environment looks like. We've all seen this before. If you've been working with Windows in the last 20 years, you're used to seeing this kind of structure. It's familiar, it's safe, it feels right. Now, it's also what we've always done. You look at the physical paper filing system and creating very small containers for documents, just you put it in the folder, that's enough organization. That's what we're used to doing with paper. And therefore, because of all that, it feels comfortable. We're used to this. We like this as an environment. It's the way we like to do things. Now, the unstructured environment has some pros and some cons. So what you're actually seeing here in a screenshot was from an academic research project that I did. So I was going through 3 to 4 different academic papers per day. I was reading, some of them I was reading in full, some of them I was just scanning the abstract for it. Either way, I'd put it in the right place. So I would put it either in my peer-reviewed or my trade journals or my background. I had another folder into there which was for educational resources, and I deleted that folder, so I have them out of sync here, but you can see my subfolder structure that I have there is based around some organization that I was doing to my PDFs. I would then rename the documents with the first author's last name followed by the year, because that's how I was sorting them together. But you can see I was sloppy with a lot of my processes. I can see the Banco document there doesn't have the year attached to it. Neither does the Caldera document. Now, why wasn't I putting that information onto there? Was I being a bad academic, or was I just harried and I didn't think of it at the time? I ended up with some poorly organized documents using this kind of system. And this is one of the risks of using an unstructured environment. But let's not pretend that there aren't benefits to this kind of system. The first one is there's no effort to file it. I take a document, I put it into the folder, I'm done. I don't have to do anything further in order to contain those documents into the right areas. Users can create whatever they feel they need. If I feel I need a folder for trade journals, I can create that. It's instant, boom, it's there, and it's done. But there are challenges to this. The first one is, as I was saying before, it's fragile. If I move a document to the wrong place, or if I don't give it the right file name, then I lose that structural information. I lose what I'm trying to do to understand how these documents relate together. The second thing is it requires an understanding of the structure. What do I mean by background? And you can see that there are subfolders under background. What are those? You have to know what my filing system is before you can determine whether or not this document should be peer-reviewed or a trade journal. This is an unstructured environment is fine for one person. It's okay for 2 people. It's terrible for lots of people. The more people that are working with the system, the more awkward, the more challenging it's going to be for them to work with it. Third, it forces disciplined use. When I wasn't disciplined putting my documents into here, I lost my structure. I lost my meaning for it. And finally, it invites chaos. It's very easy to make mistakes. It's an opportunity to make mistakes. I'm inviting mistakes to come in here. So I want to make sure that when we talk about an unstructured environment, sure, it's easy to use. It's also very easy to break. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of them as a way of working with them. I've certainly used it. I'll continue to use unstructured environments because it's what most people use on their own. But as soon as we start sharing with other people, we need something that's got a bit more robustness to it, something that's stronger. So in that spirit, we should talk about when people are using, for instance, in a file share environment. Here I've created an absurdity. So no one would ever do this, but you can see you can create an infinite level of subfolders: project, working documents, current documents, priority, temp, new folder, etc., all the way working down until I get to my archived at the bottom. Worth pointing out, there's nothing in this structure that says that my document couldn't exist at any level of this. It could be in temp, or it could be in high importance, or wherever I want to put it. So if we understand that research tells us that after 3 levels, users forget where content is. So we understand that when we go beyond 3 levels, we start to forget where the content might be. And this is another reason why an unstructured environment that uses subfolders is setting ourselves up for more frustration down the road. If I put my document in revised from notes, I'm going to forget that when I'm working in my project folder. I'm going to have to keep hunting down through different levels in order to find the content that I need to keep working. And in a shared environment, this makes it almost impossible to find documents. But let's ask the question, what are these folders actually doing? What is their benefit? For the most part, the folder is doing the work of metadata for a document. It's helping us to describe the content that we're looking at here. The comment revised from notes might be an important thing to have for metadata to see other documents that also exist as revised from notes. Or they're doing the work of a version control, such as old versions, or showing me what the status of the document is, such as archived. That then takes us over to a structured environment, and of course I'm going to use FileHold as an example. So when we're looking at a structured environment, we have a lot more tools and toys to play with for this. For instance, we have a limited filing structure. We're not going more than 3 levels deep in order for us to find the content. I don't have to try to remember where those multiple levels are. We have a document type defined using our schema. We've attached information to it that's related to a schema. We have metadata attached to it. We know information about these documents built into the documents. We have our version control being exerted onto these. When we're using these different tools, we now no longer need an elaborate subfolder structure. We don't need that unstructured free-for-all to create whatever we want to, because we have these tools that have been given to us. And this is the key thing about a structured environment that can bring to us this relational database. Now, along with that, we should also, there we are, we should also take a look at within the filing structure, since the schema and metadata are doing the work of organizing, tagging, and relating content, the library structure exists to exert control over the library content. So we're not using our library structure anymore to organize our documents, because our metadata and our schema is doing that portion of the lifting for us. That's what's doing the work. We're using our schema and our metadata to help us to classify and categorize the document. Instead, we can now use our library to exert control. Now, if you've used FileHold, you know that we control document access using the cabinet, the drawer, the cabinet, the folder, and the schema. So user must have permission to see all three of those. And the schema is binary. Either you can see the schema or you can't. So really, it's the cabinet and the folder that's doing the heavy lifting for actual control over access to the documents. So using that context, here we can see a structure that I've set up for my accounting. Now, this is a very logical way to lay things out. I've done accounting and I've done AP to help to distinguish that these are invoices, and then I've done a simple breakdown by year. So not a complicated way of organizing a library for a system. But what I'm really doing here is exerting a level of control. At the 2020 folder level, these are the users, these are the groups that are allowed to see this content versus the ones where it's going to be hidden from them. So I can see here that research and development doesn't have a right to see this particular folder. They can see the accounting cabinet, but they can't see that. They can't see this particular folder when they log in. They don't have a reason as an organization. There's no business reason for them to be able to see that. I'm exerting the rights of control. I would assume, if I was seeing this kind of filing structure where things done by year, that there's a reason to exclude one group from seeing these documents and another based on the year. So maybe within this team, the accounting group can see the 2020 folder, but maybe the accounting users or the accounting interns can't see the 2018 folder, the 2017 folder. I can change the rights based on the folder which uses as a content. If I didn't need to exert that level of control, I don't really need to break things down by year. Now, it's satisfying to do that, but it's not a requirement. It's not a necessity that I do that. Although I'm not going to argue with anybody if you say, I want to file my invoices by year. Please do. Just know that it's not necessary. I can still reach in and find my documents by year using search if I need to. But the chances of my moving into a particular folder to look for only 1 year's worth of documents, look for an entire year's worth of invoices, is very slim. What's more likely is I say, show me all the invoices from the Acme company from 2020. That's a typical thing that I might do. And this is why metadata is so important, because the subfolders aren't required. There's a relationship that's being demonstrated by the metadata. And here's an example. Show me where the metadata equals save-a-lot markets, and I find all of those documents that have save-a-lot markets within the document's metadata. What's tying these different invoices together is the presence of the name save-a-lot markets. Now, I could have also done a search for this by show me my customer names where it's save-a-lot markets, and I would find these documents just as easily. But I can do this with a broad-based search. I'm not doing something specific here. I don't have to know anything about save-a-lot markets as a company. I don't have to know anything about the contents of these, but I've been able to find all of my content using the search tools for this. And again, this is where that relational database comes into play. This is where that structure is giving me a lot of benefit. Now, when we place a document or record into a folder, we're letting FileHold know who has access to the document, and the folder name is incidental to the FileHold system. We don't care if the folder is called 2020 or called Bob. Doesn't matter to us. Either way, we're still going to be able to hold the documents into there. Although for the user, obviously, we want to find a name that matches how they're actually going to be using the documents. So for this reason, Moving documents or records from folder to folder is an action done by users with greater permission in the system, as the file being moved is having its access permissions to share altered. So let's consider that for a moment. You'll see I have a folder there called incoming invoices, just right up over here above all the rest of my AP. So my incoming invoices folder is a place where I might be bringing documents over. Let's say I was bringing them over from Capture, for example, and I'm scanning and dropping them into the incoming invoices, where then they'll be processed and then moved into the 2023 folder. Now, that's not I don't necessarily need to do that, but here's our use case. I don't want anybody in the sales team to be able to see the incoming invoices folder. I only want them to be able to see the 2023 folder because they don't have an organizational need to see incoming invoices, only approved invoices in the system. So I'm going to use the or I'm going to use the incoming invoices as a point of access control, as opposed to a point of organizational control. They happen to be in a place called incoming invoices, but its purpose is to hide those documents from other users. There are other tools to be able to exert that kind of control. So some of the best practice alternatives to this is moving from unstructured to structured can be jarring, but it's tempting to create artificial structure. It's tempting to create more folders than you need, or more drawers than you need, or more cabinets than you need, just to be able to mimic some of that physical filing structure. And there are some key ways that we can avoid creating overstructure within the system. The first one is using metadata. So for example, you can see I've got a status here for draft versus preliminary stages versus further work needed versus ready for processing. These four categories don't need an individual folder or a subfolder like you would in Windows in order to exert that. Putting the status onto the document gives me that information nice and visibly, and more important, I can find it through search. Show me all documents related to Project X that are the preliminary stage, and I can find those documents together using their metadata. Our second tool is workflow. So in addition to not only showing something that's been approved versus not approved, workflow can also hide documents. So in my case of my incoming invoices there, the incoming invoice is hidden until approved, and it goes directly in the 2023 folder. And now once that document has been approved, it then gets exposed to other people. I don't need to move it. So again, we can use that workflow tool as a way to provide us with that information beyond just simple reviews and approvals, but also controlling visibility to the content. Next, we have a virtual folder. And a virtual folder is a tool where we can relate documents together where we don't have relational database information. So for example, if I have, if I want to find all documents related to PO 123456, I don't need to do a specific virtual folder for that because my search is already finding that document together. Where that's more important is I have a group of documents that I need to bind together for a business reason that's not evident and where metadata is not valuable. So for example, I'm looking for everything that was related to the corporate takeover that we did 2 years ago. Okay, that metadata is not on those documents. I can't find them, but I can make a virtual folder to bind those documents together so I can see them. Again, I'm not creating an artificial structure, I'm creating a tool to show a relationship between my documents. In that spirit, I can also manually link documents together with FileHold. So I can show these two documents are related together, and so I want to show that relationship. We can also use a standardized naming pattern. So when people are looking at documents, so here, for example, I'm using invoice number, customer name, invoice date to create a standardized name so that I don't need to create a small bucket to put my invoices in. I can visually see what kind of document it is using that standardization given to me by the structure of the environment. And then finally, grouped views. This is another tool that I recommend people do because, again, if I've got my invoices here, here's my accounting AP 2023 folder. Instead of having to create an individual folder for my Ernie's grab and go invoices, I can simply group them together using the metadata tags that's there. That relational database is giving me some benefit. Now, I want you to remember the effort tenet. This is one of the things I tell new installs all the time. The amount of effort it takes to create, use, and maintain structure in FileHold should not be greater than the benefits the organization expects from the library content. So if you're going to, let's just go back to that previous slide here and take a look at my structure over here. If I don't need, for example, to tag documents by the invoice number, that may not be a valuable thing to put onto them. Now, in the case of invoices, I would absolutely suggest that you use the invoice number as a metadata tag. That's a unique identifier that helps me to distinguish one Ernie's grab and go from another. I could use the invoice date, but it's not as intuitive because I'll have multiple documents with the same date, even if they're different invoices from companies, whereas only one invoice will have 10514 as the invoice number. So it's a good unique identifier. But the salesperson who might have made the sale, that may be a less valuable metadata field. If no one's ever going to go in there and say, show me all the Ernie's grab and go invoices that Pierre filed last week, then that's not an important search that I need to do. If no one's ever going to look for that, why am I tagging it with metadata? So our tenant, the amount of effort it takes to create the structure, to create the cabinets, drawers, and folders, or folder groups if you're using them, or once you build that, to use it to scroll up and down and go through the different areas and browse through there and then maintain them when you have a new document creating that new structure, should not be greater than the benefits the organization expects from the library content. So elaborate structures and little envelopes might be nice to look at. It takes us back to that paper filing system. Is it worth it? Are we actually giving great benefit to us within that? Are they worth the time it takes to build? Are you always having to scroll through volumes to find what you need? This is a paper-based and unstructured way to work, and we recommend against it. Don't create elaborate structure unless you get a great benefit to the organization. Otherwise, as soon as you stop using it, someone else is not going to pick up the gauntlet and keep working with it. You'll want to find a balance for the amount of effort that it takes to create, use, and maintain the structure, and that should not be greater than the benefits. So I'm not going to take a super long time now to sort of hop out of this, but let's just head back into FileHold, and we'll open up our desktop application, and we'll take a look at a practical example here of, I've done a search for a PO number. Let's just run that search again. So here, all my documents in the system where the PO number equals 123456, obviously a junk number that I've done for the purposes of the demo, but that's why I'm doing it. And here I can see my different documents that have been put together. So I'm using the metadata, I'm using that relational database of information to find, locate, and display my documents before me. So now I can take this information if I want to, and I could send these to a virtual folder. So I could bind them together into one place and say, these are all the documents related to PO number 123456, and now I can go back over to my virtual folder, and I can see all of my PO documents here. So now I've gathered all of my documents into one place. This is exactly the same thing as running that search again. I haven't done anything here that's particularly exceptional. But if I had other content that I wanted to throw into this because they're supporting documents, I could do that. Remember that a virtual folder gives you that as a tool. I could also use workflow in order to expose or hide some of these documents. And you can see a bunch of these documents have the little H beside them. If you can see that there beside where my mouse is, hopefully your screen resolution is good enough. There's a little blue dot beside these that say that these are awaiting some level of approval. So this document, for example, I can see in the metadata over here, has not gone through any kind of workflow process because I can see that's not what its status is. Whereas if I click on this one, we can see that it has not gone through workflow either because it doesn't have any kind of markings on it. Whereas this one, let's just see if do I have an approved one in this. Nope, even that one's been checked out and it's waiting for approval. So I can use this in order to hide or show documents. And we can see that practically over here. If I click on my 2023 folder, select any one of my documents, I can see that these will have a workflow, library status, and an approval status. These were approved on Tuesday, August 15th at 1:38 p.m. So I have a timestamp on these that indicates when they went through workflow and what their approval status was. And again, that structured environment can also be used to control that information so I can hide documents until they've been approved. So until someone's actually done the sign off on this, no one's going to see any of these content into the system. The manual linking can also do that as well. So for example, if I wanted to do my PO number 123456 search, or there's my virtual folder, I could also grab all these documents together and I could manually link them. So I could right click onto these, link documents, and then choose a parent document. So I might choose the original purchase order, And now I've linked them all together and they have a linked relationship here. So I can click on this number and it shows me the link that it gives out towards those other documents. So we can use that manual linking tool. And the last thing, and we saw this before when I was looking at my folder, we've got these, if I'm looking at my different, here's my 2022 folder, here's my different documents together, I can simply right click onto this and say group these by any of my particular fields. So let's change this to a view that shows me my archives, and now I'm seeing them grouped together. So instead of having to create a subfolder for Rattlesnake Canyon groceries, I can simply look at my document that's already in the system, double click it, open it up with a native application, preview my document, verify it is what I say it's going to be, and then I know that it's the right document that's into here. So we have these as another set of tools that's available for me to find, organize, and exert the structure towards these documents.